Throughout the 1800s, London functioned as the administrative center of global trade. The city grew at an astonishing speed, fueled by an expanding empire and the rapid spread of industrial railways. But this wealth was physically fractured. On one street, a gentleman steps out of a polished carriage toward a grand, gas-lit townhouse. Just steps away, a barefoot child stands in the mud selling matches to survive. These disparities were a product of geographic density. Elegant residential squares were often built directly adjacent to chaotic, crumbling alleyways. Wealthy residents and the destitute shared the same physical environment. They walked the same pavements, used the same infrastructure, and breathed the same smoky air. In these crowded conditions, social rank decided a person's life expectancy. Class governed access to clean water and dictated whether a child would survive the winter. In districts like Mayfair, life was highly organized. The upper class followed strict social protocols, revolving around formal visits, public reputation, and dinners served on fine china. The multi-story townhouse acted as a fortress. Heavy curtains and expensive furniture insulated the family from the smoke and noise of the streets outside. Maintaining this comfort required constant labor. Beneath the polished floors, in basement kitchens and small attic rooms, a massive force of domestic servants kept the household running. Many were young women from poor backgrounds who arrived in London seeking shelter. They worked from before sunrise until late at night, carrying water, emptying chamber pots, and cleaning, often performing their duties entirely in silence. These servants were the physical link between the two Londons. They lived in the presence of extreme luxury, while enduring the same backbreaking labor as the city's poorest residents. In the East End, the infrastructure collapsed. Entire families were crammed into single rooms without drainage or fresh water. In these slums, the smell of sewage and rotting waste dominated daily life. Survival was based on irregular labor. A man might find work at the docks for one afternoon, earning just enough for bread and tea, and then have no income for the rest of the week. Because wages were so low, children were forced into the streets to scavenge, sell matches, or work in factories. For the poor, childhood was sacrificed to the immediate need for income. Without a modern safety net, the risk of total disaster was constant. One workplace accident or a single bout of fever meant immediate starvation for an entire family. While the wealthy focused on social seasons and future reputation, the poor lived in a state of constant uncertainty about the next 24 hours. Because the rich and poor lived in such close proximity, the wealthy could not isolate themselves from the consequences of the slums. Contaminated water supplies allowed cholera and typhoid to move through shared pipes, sweeping from the crowded East End into the homes of the elite. Desperation also drove crime. The violence and theft common in the poorest districts frequently spilled over into affluent neighborhoods, fueling a climate of fear and judgment. Those who became destitute faced the workhouse. These institutions were designed to be deliberately harsh and humiliating, separating families to ensure only the most desperate would enter. The geographical boundaries meant to separate the two Londons were ultimately an illusion. The inequality of the slums poisoned the city's water, its safety, and its long-term stability. By the late 1800s, London was defined by staggering industrial growth. Massive stations and trade networks showcased a city at the height of its power. As reformers began to map these streets, they documented a cycle of low wages, overcrowded housing, and inevitable disease. These studies revealed that the suffering in the East End was a predictable outcome of an unregulated city. These findings shifted the perspective of the era. Poverty was increasingly viewed not as a personal character flaw, but as a systemic failure of the environment that the poor were forced to inhabit. Victorian London remains a study in the costs of progress. It illustrates how a city can generate immense wealth, while the laborers who build its infrastructure remain trapped in the shadows of that success.